School's out, Professor. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Player Display. This time around, we are taking a look at a very awesome figure, being the Walmart exclusive retro-carded Spider-Man Lizard. Now, we've seen the Lizard twice before in Hasbro Marvel Legends, before Toy Biz was, put down. And I think they were the very big Build-A-Figure Lizard, which everyone agreed was a little bit too much like a dinosaur and wasn't quite lizard enough. And then they also did the Amazing Spider-Man 1 version, I believe, or did Toy Biz handle that one as well? Well, regardless, both versions of them were from way back when, and I think for a very long time, a classic comic or animated series Lizard has been on people's bucket list, including mine. The last one I had was the Toy Biz Ultimate Spider-Man Lizard, which looked very different. It had like a big old fin on the head, it lacked the lab coat, so it was a whole different experience, but now this is definitely my definitive Lizard. But anyway, so looking at the figure, he is just barely fitting on camera. He's quite tall, which is a very good thing. And yeah, let's go ahead and start with, well, the head. And this is one of two head sculpts that we have, and it is exactly what you want the Lizard to be. Not too elongated like the Build-A-Figure one, and not too subdued like the TASM 1 design, even though I didn't mind that design in retrospect. But, of course, this is the Lizard that always comes to my head whenever we're thinking about this character, Curt Connors, of course. The sculpt work is absolutely immaculate. You can make out all the scales. It's very obvious that he's a reptile, and it's not so smooth that you can mistake him for an amphibian or something like that. And of course, you got the trademark tongue coming out that many of Spider-Man's villains tend to have. Interesting. And you got some nice yellow eyes, which are well painted. Maybe I'd prefer that the pupil be a little bit wider, but even then, you still have a really nice serpentine saurian eye that continues that reptile aesthetic. On the back of the head, the sculpt work continues, and the scales get a little wider as they transition down to the tail. And also the teeth are very well done, well sculpted, and also very well painted. I'm not seeing too many paint mishaps going on in this figure. You can sort of see that it's not just molded in the green, but it looks like they took some care to do some accent work in between each of the scales, which is very nice. So it has a much darker, almost foresty green to sort of be sure that each of the segmented scales stands out on its own. Now, I have actually shown off this figure before as part of a size comparison, and the difference between how it looked then and how it looks now is I put back on the original lab coat, because now I have a third-party soft goods one that I use by swap them out for the sake of this review. And that brings us to the torso here, where you have, sculpt-wise, a very good lab coat that is, again, part of the classic Curt Connors aesthetic, and it looks absolutely fine. I don't prefer solid trench coats, jackets, as much as I would prefer cloth, which is, again, why I got the third-party one, but it's not bad. I mean, it shapes up well, it doesn't hinder articulation a whole ton, it's made of a nice, thin, malleable material, so it's not going to get in the way too much when you're fiddling with this guy. It does continue down to the sleeves where it gets nice and ripped up, which is really nice attention to detail. It's not just painted on, it's part of the actual sculpt, which helps a lot with the silhouette, I think. And if you go to the back, I like how it sort of widens out in that slit so it can accommodate for the tail, so that's very good. And underneath the jacket, not a whole lot to see, it's kind of just an undershirt. The reptilian aesthetic continues down to the hands, which are very well sculpted and also very well painted. They are not mismatched plastic-wise, the paint scheme is exactly the same, and they look very good. And that brings me to my one, not really complaint, but just something I noticed with this figure, is it does not have claws on the hands nor the feet, which is another one of the Lizard staples. But when it comes to the alternate head, which we'll have a look in a minute, it will actually come to make sense, so stay tuned for that. Going down to the pants, you got that very classic purple, which I absolutely love. Very saturated, just straight up casual purple jeans, pretty much. And very much like the sleeves on the jacket, they are all tattered down at the bottom as a result of his transformation, of course. And then you also get the feet, which are very wide both ways and very stubby at the toes, which I kind of like. And they, too, have the same paint scheme and weathering going on. And on the back, of course, what's a lizard without his tail, which has not been too well executed in the past. This is probably the best one I've ever seen. The Build-A-Figure one had, I think, a pretty long tail, but it was jointed very far apart from each joint, so it didn't look natural at all when you bent it. And as for the Amazing Spider-Man 1 version, it was just one solid piece, and I think it was way too short. So in this case, it looks very good for one, and also it has a bendy wire, which might give us hope for a future release of Doc Ock for those people who don't want to customize and prefer to just open the Doc Ock with bendable tentacles. But in this case, the tail is really good. I don't like to stress it too much because I don't want to break the wire on the inside. That's just a worry for myself, but when I'm actually handling it, I don't feel like it's going to break or anything. It's very well done. The wire seems to trail all the way through until just about below the tip, so it doesn't quite go that far. Like if I coil it as much as I can, yeah, you can see it still kind of goes straight out, but not too bad. If you just arc it and balance it out, it looks pretty natural. And also it does swivel around really good. And that is because when you first get this figure, this tail is actually removed from the figure itself so it could fit on the retro card. So it's a simple little swivel peg. It's nice and easy to pull out and put back on. I mean, without it, it looks a little bit strange. So let's go ahead and slot that back on. As for accessories, as I said, there is a very important second head sculpt that we have. So if we go ahead and remove this one there, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, it does not have an articulated jaw, which is a little bit of a bummer, but not a big deal. He has a very good one-size-fits-all expression going on. And you got this second one here, which is a little bit on the goofy side, but at the same time, very nostalgic. This is how he looked when he first appeared in the comics. So he doesn't really have the teeth, he doesn't have yellow eyes, the pupils are just little dots, and not like those cat or reptile eyes that we now come to expect with him, and he doesn't have the long spindly tongue. So it's very classic and very cheesy looking, kind of as you'd perhaps imagine him in the original Ditko comics, or perhaps in the very first TV show. So I really like this head sculpt a lot. I can honestly go either way with both of these heads. They're both very fun to play around with. And this head sculpt is actually what informs the rest of the figure, which is why we do not have the claws, as I mentioned before. Apparently in the original comics, he just had green reptile hands, but no claws to speak of. So that allows me to sort of forgive the fact that they're not there. So he won't have any clawing action going on. I mean, he could still, I guess, paw at Spider-Man, so he's got something going for him. For me, I've actually come around to not having claws at all. I considered maybe doing some custom ones, but after realizing how tedious that would be and kind of coming to love the figure as it is, I'm just going to leave it the way that it stands, aside from, of course, replacing the coat. It's also worth mentioning that I really like that regardless of whether you choose to swap out the cloak or not, you will always have the tail, and that allows him to sort of tripod. So this figure is kind of his own action figure stand. That kind of acts as a bonus. You can put him in any pose, and you'll have to pay too much attention to the ankles. You can get him in any stance you want, and he handles himself just fine. Now, as you can see, continuing with the accessories, I just swapped out both of the hands for the two other hands that he has. The first one that he has is a straight-up punching fist, which, again, it continues on with that paint. Basically, there's no painting issues with this figure whatsoever. Now I'll shut up about it. And then over here, you have a nice gripping hand, which is good for multiple things, but the main thing that this figure wants you to do is have him hold two vials of chemicals or elixirs or whatever you like to call it. So you actually have two of these, and they're made of a really nice acrylic see-through plastic. So you have this one here with a little bob of yellow. Why it doesn't expand to fill in the entire flask there, I'm not sure. And then we also have this, well, an actual flask right here, this time with a more red or orange-ish kind of liquid going on. I really like them both, but part of me wishes that perhaps there was a third one that was green. I mean, you'd kind of expect that with Curt Connors, but, you know, oh well. I guess this is maybe green to a particular eye, but for me, I just see yellow. I also kind of wish that maybe we had two gripping hands, so it could look like he was pouring one bottle into the other, know what I mean? And then he's getting ready to become the lizard. And since those are the only accessories that Lizard comes with, that brings me into a segue of another potential opportunity that they missed out on with this figure that has been very long awaited. As you can see next to him, we have kind of an early size comparison being NECA's Universal Monsters Wolfman. The reason why I bring him in is, what do these two characters have in common? Give it a minute. Think about it. They originally started as a man, that then became a beast. And the reason why I mentioned that is, of course, yeah, they have a very similar story, but one thing that NECA went out of their way to do, and it's a little unfair because they're different figure lines, but still, I feel like it's something that Hasbro could have done, is of course you have the Wolfman, but then you have extra pieces like a head here being Long Chaney, then you also have some alternate hands, and then you even have alternate feet to turn him back into his human form. So it would have been really cool if they went out of their way to include a Curt Connors head and then his hands and feet, so you could sort of switch him back into his original scientist look, which would be kind of cool. So he could be in the lab with Curt Connors, or, well, wait. So he could be in the lab with Dr. Octavius or Norman Osborn or even, hey, Peter Parker, right? And then you could even have like a mid-transformation thing where he has his hand up and then his head's normal, but he has a reptilian hand. It's sort of like a what's happening to me sort of thing. So that's kind of a missed opportunity, but then again, it's still a very strong figure as he stands. All right, now we're going to make a scrappy effort to look over the articulation of this very big figure, which happens to be very good. So again, we will start from head to toe. We have the articulation's the same no matter which head you have, but since this is probably the one most people are going to be more likely to display him with. He's got all the way that much. All right, all the way was perhaps an overstatement, but he doesn't go that far back. But he goes a fair deal down, so you can look down on a downed Spider-Man or somebody who's defeated or whatever, or perhaps on a table of potions, which I really like. And then, yeah, he swivels around, really good. And that is all thanks to a ball joint, or is it a ball joint or a dumbbell? No, it's a single hinge ball joint that's going in that neck. And then you also have a ball joint here just below it when it meets the torso. As for the torso itself, you have a ball joint in the pecs, I suppose, and you can get a good amount of swivel in there. You have a pretty good ab crunch when you put both of those together. And then he can go back a good deal, but it's a little hindered by the jacket. Again, that's why the soft goods is going to be so useful. The shoulders, even though this is, I think, a completely new mold, they feel a little bit primitive to me. I guess that's just because it's a bigger shape, and when I think of bigger shapes, I think of the older body molds that didn't have good articulation. But in this case, it's still good. I mean, it swivels all the way around, it goes out, it goes back in. You can hear that ratchet joint in there, so it's not going to be too slippery at any point. You got a swivel at the bicep. You have pinless double-jointed elbows. Let's get that lower one going. I mean, higher one, I mean. And yeah, it goes all the way there. It goes all the way back. All the hands swivel, and all of them are out and in. There's no up and down on any of the wrists. For the legs, you got a good thigh swivel right there. Kicks out almost to 90. Yeah, pretty much almost to 90. Then he goes back, and then the butt kind of makes it swivel out to that V, as we kind of talked about before with Silk, which is fine, not a big deal. And then as for the knees, they are also pinless. I'm going to keep mentioning that until I one day see a pinned one again. I just really like the pinless ones. And then if you work both of those joints, he comes down all the way there, so that way the thigh meets the calf. There might be a swivel, yeah, just over the foot that's hiding inside of the leg, which is very great. I really like the fact that they did that. The ankles are also excellent. They go that far back, which is pretty much as far back as you want them to go, and that looks really good. Goes up, not too great, but it's not a huge deal. I mean, again, when you have him tripoding between the tail and the feet, the ankles aren't going to be a huge deal. And then you also have very excellent rocker. And I've never mentioned these before, but every figure we've reviewed up to this point has portholes on the bottom of the feet, which is pretty standard, so don't expect me to talk about that all the time. Now, even though I'm more often than not going to have Lizard in a somewhat crouching position, or perhaps in a jumping through the air position with the help of a figure stand, I've tripoded him and stretched out the legs as far as I can so we could do our size comparison. So here we have him beside two of our favorite heroes, being my custom Spider-Man with the Ben Reilly head and the Renew Your Vows body, along with Silk, who we just reviewed from the Doc Ock and Silk Amazon exclusive 2-pack. And while I barely have them on screen, let's have a look at his green scientists gone bad brethren, being Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin, and Dr. Octavius as the, Dr. Octopus. To see how he stacks against some big figs, we have the retro-carded Rhino, along with the MCU Venom. And to compare him with NECA, I brought in the werewolf from Universal Studios, who we just had a look at, along with RoboCop. And to see how he looks beside some of our little friends here, we have the Star Wars Black Series Omega, the Child, Ruby, and of course Muck Muck, and why else but Muck Muck. And thus concludes our review of the really awesome Walmart exclusive Lizard, who I think is absolutely fantastic, and I can sum him up in 5 words: get him while you can. It's taken way too long for us to get the definitive Lizard, and it's very clear that he's very hard to obtain at this point. Don't do what I did and get him for scalper prices, because that's just not a smart thing to do. Just hope that you can find him on shelves, or perhaps trade him with a friend, or just wait until they hopefully re-release him. I hope they do. And then maybe they could do the thing where you could replace him with the Curt Connors head and the hands, maybe include a green potion. That would make a little bit more sense. I pretty much do not have a bad word to say about this figure. Everything about him is absolutely fantastic. Again, I got the soft goods cloak, which is just a matter of preference. If you prefer the solid plastic, this one doesn't feel like it's just cardboard being draped behind a figure. Its malleability is very good. It doesn't get in the way of articulation, and it's easy to take on and off if you do want that option to swap it out with something that is actually made of fabric. Actually, I could show you right here. Here is a soft goods version that I have, since I'm probably not going to commit an entire video to it, so I'll show you what it looks like with it on. And yeah, after I do that swap, I love this figure even more, especially since it has more of a dynamic feel to it, and it does improve articulation going back, because you don't have that big piece of plastic getting in the way. But aside from going backwards, this plastic piece is not bad. It's overall stays out of the way, and it looks really good. I will actually go ahead back to eBay and look for a link to this jacket, and I'll drop it in the description. Of course, when you have custom third-party goods for action figures on eBay, they don't always last forever, but I'll put the link there regardless in case anyone wants to go check for one. And odds are there's going to be different people making their own interpretations of the jacket. In this case, this one came with some brown weathering, like right there. Very subtle, but it works. And it's also nice and tattered up at the sleeves, and you got some more weathering going on the brim of the entire lab coat in general. And it also has bendy wires, so if I want him to just be standing there, not doing a whole ton, then that's an option as well. Thank you guys again very much for watching. Again, I'm very much enjoying making these videos, stitching them together and editing. It just gives me an extra something to do. Again, there's no real agenda at the moment, except for the fact that as I find figures that aren't too overly customized to the point that they're very distant from how they looked at a factory, then they are subject for review. And of course, I'll always review the box where I can. In this case, I did not have it, but it was the usual retro-carded Spider-Man backing that's kind of influenced by the animated series from the 90s. Which I was not alive to see, but yeah, what really matters the most is the plastic that comes out of the cardboard in the plastic rather than what we see inside of the box. Obviously, I'm not a mint collector, as I mentioned before. For me, toys are meant to be played with. Henceforth, here we are with the Lizard having a great time, having a fun video, and having some good laughs along the way, I hope. So, thank you guys very much. I hope you're enjoying your new year, and I will see you all later. I pretty much do not have a single bad word to sing about. But yeah, maybe the yellow and red mixed together create the green, but that would be orange, wouldn't it? I don't know, there's some chemicals or whatever in there. Maybe it'll become green regardless. I actually did not get him at Walmart. I did have to go ahead and pay scalper, but it was holidays. It was a special occasion, so I felt like this was the guy who fit the bill if it came to getting a figure that was, you know, all hell with the wallet. And yeah, here we are. Don't adopt my habits. It's not good for your health.